she was just the maid. That's what everyone in that mansion believed, the quiet black woman who moved through the halls without a word, cleaned without complaint, and noticed without showing it. For 6 months, Amara kept her head down while something deeply wrong lived behind a bolted door that nobody was supposed to question. But when she finally pressed her ear to that door and heard 2 words whispered from the other side, "Help me," she made a decision that was going to cost her everything, because what was hidden in that room wasn't just a secret, it was a billion-dollar lie. And the man running it had planned for every possible threat, every single one, except her. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today, and if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed. Well, the mansion had its own kind of silence, not the comfortable kind you find in a home where people sleep peacefully and wake up without dread. This was the silence of a place that had been arranged to feel permanent. Marble floors so polished they swallowed sound, hallways so wide they made footsteps feel small, and air that smelled of money and something beneath it, something older and harder to name. Amara had noticed that silence on her very first day, 6 months ago. She'd stood in the staff entrance with her paperwork and her sensible shoes, and the head housekeeper, Mrs. Collins, had walked her through the ground floor with the brisk efficiency of someone who had long since stopped being impressed by anything. Amara had nodded at the right moments, asked no unnecessary questions, and kept her eyes moving, the way she always did in a new place, taking stock. That was how she worked. That was who she was. She was 32 years old, with careful hands and a memory that held on to details the way a good lock holds a key. She had grown up in a household where nothing was given, where you learned early to read rooms and people the way some kids read picture books, out of necessity, because missing something could cost you. That habit had followed her into adulthood and into every job she'd ever held. It was, in her experience, the most useful thing about her. The other staff didn't think much about her. She was quiet, thorough, and stayed in her lane. All things that made people in houses like this feel comfortable. Marcus, who handled the cars and deliveries, called her the ghost, with the kind of affectionate dismissal that meant he didn't think about her much at all. Petra, who worked the kitchen, sometimes left her a plate of food with a note, which was kind. Mrs. Collins watched her the way Collins watched everyone, with measured suspicion kept at a professional temperature. None of them saw what Amara saw. She saw the way the household operated in concentric circles, outer staff, inner staff, and then a locked door at the center of it all. The private wing, Edward Hale's domain. A corridor that turned a corner and ended at a set of double doors she had never once seen open. In 6 months she had cleaned everything in this mansion except that wing. Not because no one had assigned her there, but because the assignment had never come. That corridor was cleaned apparently by no one, or by someone who didn't exist in the staff schedules she'd seen posted in the service kitchen. She had filed that away without drawing attention to it. Edward Hale himself was a presence more felt than seen. Amara had laid eyes on him twice, maybe 3 times in 6 months, and each time it had been brief. A silhouette at the far end of a hallway, a figure retreating into a room before she could get a proper look. The other staff talked about him the way people talk about weather, a force you worked around rather than engaged with. He was a recluse. He was paranoid. He'd had a breakdown years ago and never fully came back from it. He was a genius who preferred machines to people. The stories varied depending on who was telling them and what kind of afternoon they were having. What Amara had actually observed was simpler and stranger than any of those stories. Food trays. That was the thing she kept coming back to. Every evening, a dinner tray was prepared in the kitchen and left at the entrance to the private wing, set just inside the corridor on a small table near the wall. By morning, the tray was gone. At first, she had assumed he collected it himself, ate in his room, and returned the empty tray to the same spot before the morning staff arrived. That would have been eccentric, but explainable. Except some mornings, the food on the tray was untouched. She'd noticed it twice in her first month and once more in the third month. Covered plates still sealed, a glass of water with the condensation ring still fresh on the liner beneath it. And yet the tray was never there by the time the kitchen staff came to collect it. Someone was removing it, someone who didn't want the untouched food to be seen. She had said nothing. She had simply remembered. The first sound came on a Tuesday. She was in the hallway outside the private wing, not inside it, just near the corner where the corridor branched off, working late because she'd fallen behind on the third-floor guest rooms and wanted to finish before morning. The rest of the live-in staff had gone to bed. The mansion had settled into its particular nighttime hush. She heard it while she was wiping down a wall sconce, a thud. Low, muffled, but unmistakable. The sound of something solid making contact with a hard floor. She went still. She waited. Then came the scraping. That was what made her skin tighten, not the thud. Now, which could have been anything, a piece of furniture, something knocked off a shelf. But the scraping was different. It had a quality to it that suggested intention. Something being dragged, something being moved with effort or against resistance. She stood there for a count of 10. Nothing else came. She told herself it was the building settling. Old houses made noises, mansions made them louder. She finished the sconce, gathered her cart, and went back to the guest rooms. But she lay awake for a long time that night, listening to the silence and hearing, beneath it, the faint ghost of that scraping sound. The next morning she mentioned it to Mrs. Collins. Carefully, casually, the way you raise something when you want to seem unconcerned. Last night, working late on the third floor, Amara said, or pouring herself coffee in the staff kitchen while Collins reviewed the day's schedule. I heard something from the direction of Mr. Hale's wing, a sound, like something falling maybe. Collins didn't look up from her clipboard. Mr. Hale values his privacy, she said. Her voice was even, controlled, the way a wall is controlled, designed to stop things rather than invite them. The private wing is not your concern. I wasn't suggesting. If you have concerns about something you've heard, Collins said, finally looking up, you bring them to me, and I address them. You don't speculate, you don't investigate, you do your work. She held Amara's gaze for a moment, not hostile exactly, but very deliberate. Is that clear? Yes, Amara said. It was perfectly clear, and it was also, she noted, not really an answer to what she'd said. T. Collins hadn't said there was nothing to worry about. She hadn't said she'd look into it. She had simply redirected, with enough quiet pressure behind it to feel like something more than a reminder about job duties. Amara drank her coffee and said nothing else. The second night was worse. She wasn't even near the private wing when it started. She was on the landing of the main staircase, replacing a burnt-out bulb in the fixture overhead. The crash reached her there, clear enough to make her hand slip on the fixture casing. Louder than the night before, something heavier, or something that had fallen from higher up, or both. Then silence. She descended the stairs slowly, crossed the main hall, and stood at the entrance to the private corridor. The double doors at the far end were closed, as always. She walked toward them. Her hand reached for the door handle. She stopped, because she looked down, just a reflex, just her eyes moving the way they always did, and she saw the mechanism on the door frame. Not a keypad, not a standard lock. A heavy-gauge bolt mechanism, old style, manual. And it was engaged from the outside. She stepped back. She stood there and looked at the door and thought through what that meant, because she was someone who thought things through before reacting. If Edward Hale was inside his own bedroom, the door to his private wing could not be bolted from the outside. That was not how locks worked. That was not how any of this made sense, unless he wasn't the one who had locked it. She turned and walked away, back through the main hall, up the stairs, to her room. She sat on the edge of her bed in the dark. She did not sleep much. The next day, she found the camera. She had gone back to the private corridor in the afternoon, openly, pushing her cleaning cart, as if she had reason to be there. She was looking for something out of place, something she might have missed, and she found it mounted in the upper corner of the corridor just before the bend that led to the double doors. Small, matte black housing, almost invisible against the dark paint of the crown molding. She didn't stare at it. She glanced at it the way you glance at anything you've already cataloged and moved on, keeping her expression neutral. But the angle of it was telling. It wasn't covering the broader hallway. It was pointed directly at the double doors, at whoever approached them. She thought about the bolt on the outside of the door. She thought about the untouched food trays that somehow disappeared. She thought about Mrs. Collins' eyes on her over the rim of a clipboard. She kept walking. Leo was not the sort of person who drew attention to himself, which was probably why he was good at his job. He was in his mid-30s, lean, with the quiet precision of someone who spent more time thinking than speaking. He maintained the security systems and the technical infrastructure of the mansion, a job that apparently required him to exist in a constant state of mild invisibility, moving through rooms with tools and tablets and never quite being in the way. She had spoken to him perhaps a dozen times in 6 months, mostly logistics. He knew she was observant. She had seen him register that about her in the first week. Also in the way he'd pause and recalibrate when she asked a question that was sharper than he'd expected from the new maid. She found him in the service corridor near the back of the house, running a diagnostic on one of the camera relay boxes. She stopped her cart nearby and made a show of checking her supply inventory. "The camera at the bend in the east corridor," she said, keeping her voice even and low. "The one pointed at the private wing doors. Was it always there?" Leo didn't look at her. He continued working. "Why?" he said. "Because I don't remember it from my first week." A pause. He closed the panel on the relay box and latched it. "Some doors in this house," he said, still not looking at her, "aren't meant to be opened, not because of what's inside." He picked up his bag. "But because of who put the lock there." He walked away without another word. She stood in the service corridor and turned that sentence over in her mind like an object she was trying to identify by shape. Because of who put the lock there. Not a warning to leave it alone. Not quite. More like the kind of thing someone says when they want to tell you something without telling you anything, because someone might be listening, because saying more would cost them more than they were prepared to spend right now. She noted it, filed it, moved on. The third night, she went back. She knew she was pushing against something she didn't fully understand yet. She went anyway, because the alternative, doing nothing while something wrong was happening behind a bolted door in a house full of people being carefully managed, was not something she was built for. She stood in the corridor outside the double doors. She pressed her ear gently to the wood. For a long moment, nothing. Then the faint sound of movement, irregular, careful, like someone trying not to make noise, and then a voice, not a crash, not a thud, a voice, barely above a breath, the kind of sound a person makes when they are not sure if it will reach anyone, but they say it anyway because they have run out of other options. "Help me." 2 words, that was all. Amara pulled back from the door. Her heart was moving fast, but her face was still. She had trained her face over many years to stay still when the rest of her couldn't afford to. She stood in the dim corridor and looked at the bolted door and understood with cold and absolute clarity that the person inside that room was not Edward Hale, or at least not Edward Hale as she had been meant to understand him. She turned and walked back through the corridor, deliberate, unhurried. She did not run. She had a decision to make. She lay awake that night and thought about the people who would tell her to report it, call the police, tell Collins, tell someone above Collins, go through proper channels. She turned each option over and looked at what was under it. Collins already knew. That much was almost certain. The camera on the corridor was new, placed there to monitor exactly what she had been doing. Someone had made deliberate structural choices to keep staff away from that door, to keep the trays removed before anyone noticed they were untouched, to keep the security footage unquestioned. Whatever was happening in that room was being managed, which meant the systems around it were compromised, which meant the people she would normally report to were not people she could trust. She thought about Leo. His warning hadn't been leave it alone. It had been something more ambiguous than that, something that left a door open. She thought about the two words she had heard pressed against the old wood of that bolted door. Help me. She made her decision before the sun came up. She was going to open that door. Not tonight, not without preparation, but soon. She needed to know what was on the other side. She needed to know who was asking. By the following night, she had a plan. She'd found the right tools. A tension wrench and a pick she'd purchased years ago during a brief, practical phase of learning things she thought might be useful. She'd kept them in her toiletry bag without ever having occasion to use them. She had occasion now. She went to Leo. She found him in the monitoring room at the end of his shift, a small room behind the service stairs, lined with screens. She knocked twice, the way she'd seen other staff do, and he opened the door and looked at her and did not seem surprised to see her there. I need you to cut the feed to that camera, she said, the one at the corridor bend. 10 minutes, that's all. He looked at her for a long moment. You know what you're walking into? He said. Not yet, she said. That's the point. He held her gaze. She held his. Something passed between them. Not agreement exactly, more like recognition. The kind that happens when two people in a difficult situation both realize they've already made their choice and are only now saying it out loud. 10 minutes, he said. After that, I can't help you. She nodded. The camera feed cut at 11:47 p.m. Amara moved quickly down the east corridor, keeping her footsteps light and her breathing even. The mansion was quiet. She reached the double doors, crouched to the lock, and worked the tension wrench and pick with the focused calm of someone who had thought this through and committed to it. The bolt took longer than she'd hoped, 40, 50 seconds, but it gave. She pushed the door open slowly and stepped through. The room was dark. She waited for her eyes to adjust before reaching for the narrow flashlight she'd brought, keeping the beam low and controlled. What she found when she could see properly was strange, not chaotic, not the way you'd expect a room to look when someone was living in it or suffering in it. The bedroom was immaculate. A made bed with tight corners, no personal items on the surfaces, the furniture arranged the way rooms look in photographs taken before anyone moves in. No glass of water on the nightstand, no shoes by the door, no wrinkle in the bed cover. It was staged. That was the word that came to her, like a set. She stood in the center of the room and listened. Silence. Then tapping. Faint. Rhythmic almost. Coming from the far wall. She crossed to it, holding the flashlight steady. Up close. So she could see things she wouldn't have noticed from across the room. The wallpaper had seams that didn't quite align with the plaster joins beneath. There was a hairline crack running vertically, not the kind that came from age or settling, but the kind that came from an edge, a seam between two surfaces. She ran her fingers along it. The wall was hollow here. She could feel it in the way the sound changed when she pressed with her knuckle, a different resonance, a fraction deeper. She'd brought a small pry bar. She worked it into the seam, gentle at first, then with more pressure as the resistance gave way. The wallpaper separated. The plaster cracked along a line that had clearly been broken before. She could see the repair, the fresh putty work. Someone had opened this before. Someone had then sealed it back. She pulled the panel free. The space behind the wall was perhaps 4 feet wide, the gap between the bedroom wall and the exterior wall of the building. Deep enough, shaped like a narrow room that wasn't supposed to exist. He was sitting against the far wall, knees drawn up, head down. He was thin, not the thin of someone who chose to be thin, but the thin of someone who had been given very little. His shirt was the same kind of dress shirt that appeared in the photographs she'd seen of Edward Hale. Fine fabric, monogrammed, but it was stained now, wrinkled beyond recovery, hanging off him. When the light hit him, he flinched and raised a hand. She lowered the beam. He looked up at her, and she stopped breathing for a second, because she knew that face. She had seen it in the photographs in the mansion's main hall, in the formal portrait above the fireplace in the sitting room. The jaw, the brow, the particular set of the eyes. She was looking at Edward Hale, except he was crouching in a hidden compartment behind his own bedroom wall, and he looked like he hadn't eaten a full meal in days. "Who are you?" His voice was barely there, rough, dry, the voice of someone whose body was running on very little. "My name is Amara," she said. "I work here. I'm one of the maids." He stared at her. Something in his expression shifted through several things, very fast. Disbelief, fear, and then something else. Something that looked almost like relief, but so unused that he didn't quite know what to do with it. "You found it," he whispered. "You actually found it." "Who are you?" she said, though she already felt she knew. "My name is Edward Hale." A pause. "I'm the real one." She crouched down to his level. He spoke in fragments, short sentences, pausing to breathe, as if the effort of talking was a physical one. She listened without interrupting. She had always been good at listening. He had been in the compartment for 11 days. Before that, they'd kept him in the room itself, locked in, given minimal food while they worked on the transition. The transition, that was the word he used, his voice going flat when he said it. They'd drugged him. He wasn't sure for how long. He'd woken up in the compartment and hadn't been out since. Someone else was living as him, walking his halls, sitting in his meetings, speaking with his voice. Someone who looked like him because... He stopped, looked at her carefully. "How much time do I have?" he said. "I disabled the camera," she said. 10 minutes from about 6 minutes ago." He nodded. He was saving the rest for later. Conserving. She understood that instinct. "There's food in the wall gap there," he said, pointing. "Someone has been leaving it. Not much, but..." She realized, with a slow turn of comprehension, that the disappeared food trays had never left the mansion. They had come here. Someone, perhaps someone on the inside, had been doing the bare minimum to keep him alive, which meant at least one person knew and hadn't entirely abandoned him. "I'm going to come back," she said, "with water, with more food, and I need you to hold on a little longer." He said nothing for a moment. Then, "The signing. You need to know about the signing." "Later," she said. "Tonight. I'll come back tonight. Can you hold on until then?" His jaw tightened. He nodded. She replaced the panel as carefully as she could, pressing the edges back into alignment. It wasn't perfect. Up close you could see the disturbance, but in the dark of this room, from across the space, it would have to do. She left the bedroom. She stepped back into the corridor, pulled the double door closed, and re-engaged the bolt from the outside. She walked back around the corridor bend with 4 seconds to spare before Leo's voice came quietly through the earpiece she'd been wearing. "Feed's back on," he said. She kept walking. She had barely made it to the service stairs when she heard footsteps behind her, not from the direction she'd come, but from ahead, heavy, deliberate. She pressed herself into the alcove beside the staircase door and went very still. A man walked past the mouth of the service corridor, heading toward the private wing. The posture she had seen before at a distance, but now she had something to compare it against, and the comparison sat in her chest like ice. The same jaw, the same broad shoulders, the same way of moving, or an imitation of it so well practiced it was almost seamless. Almost. She knew what Edward Hale looked like in distress. She had just seen it. And this man, walking calmly, with that particular ease of someone who has never once had to convince himself he belonged somewhere, moved differently. Not in any way she could point to cleanly, but differently. She watched him disappear around the corner. She found Leo still in the monitoring room, pulling on his jacket. "Close," he said. "Very." He looked at her. He wanted to say something. She could see it, and held it back. "He's in there," she said quietly. "The real Hale, behind the wall." Leo went very still. His eyes moved, the way they did when he was running through something fast. She watched him reach the same conclusion she had reached, and feel the same thing she had felt. That cold drop of understanding when something you'd been trying not to believe becomes unavoidable. "How long?" he said. "He thinks 11 days. He's weak. He needs food and water, and we need to figure out what's happening before it gets worse." "How much worse does it get?" She remembered what Hale had started to say before she'd stopped him. The signing. "He mentioned something," she said. "An event, something time-sensitive." He didn't finish telling me before I had to leave." Leo sat back down slowly in his chair. He looked at the screens in front of him, the live feeds from around the mansion, all of them quiet and unremarkable, the house presenting its careful face. "You know what this means," he said. "If someone has been living as Hale, if they've been making financial decisions in his name, I know," she said. "That's not just kidnapping. I know." He rubbed his jaw. He looked like a man who had just realized the exit he'd been standing near was sealed. "All right," he said. He said it the way people say something when they have decided, not when they feel good about the decision. "All right. What do we do first?" "First," Amara said, "we keep him alive. Then we figure out who else is part of this." She thought about Mrs. Collins. The way she had shut down Amara's mention of the noise with something that wasn't quite a threat, but had all the weight of one. The particular control in her expression, not the control of someone doing their job, but the control of someone managing a secret. "I think Collins is involved," she said. Leo didn't argue. He looked at the screens. "There's something else you need to know," he said. "The security systems, some of the camera feeds have been altered. Certain corridors loop old footage during certain time windows. It's been going on for weeks." "Who altered them?" "Someone with administrative access." He paused. "The kind of access only I should have, or Hale," she said. "Or whoever is pretending to be him." She stood in the monitoring room and looked at the screens. At the mansion presenting its clean, he still faced to every camera, hiding everything beneath it. And she thought about the man in the narrow space behind the wall, conserving his breath, waiting for someone to come back. She thought about what he had almost said. The signing. Whatever it was, it had a deadline. She could feel it. She was going back tonight. She would bring food and water, and she would hear the rest. And then, she wasn't sure yet what came after, but the outline of it was starting to form, the way shapes appear in a dark room when your eyes finally adjust. She had broken the first rule. The door was open now. There was no version of this where she closed it again. The mansion looked the same in the morning. That was the thing that unsettled her most, the way it held its shape so perfectly, the marble still gleaming, the flower arrangement still fresh. The staff still moving through their routines like the gears of a clock that had been wound and set and never questioned. Nothing on the surface said that a man was hidden behind a wall in the east wing, starving in a space 4 feet wide, while someone wearing his face signed his name to documents downstairs. Amara moved through her morning duties and thought about how much she still didn't know. She knew the real Hale was alive. She knew the man impersonating him had been operating with enough confidence and access to alter the security systems, restructure staff routines, and keep everyone around him carefully managed. She knew Collins was part of it, She knew Leo was quietly on her side, though she didn't yet know how far that would hold when things got harder. What she didn't know was the shape of it, how long it had been planned, who else was involved, and what exactly the signing meant, and when it was happening. She needed answers, and she needed them before she made another move. She went back to the hidden compartment that night, earlier than before. She'd filled a small insulated bag with food from the kitchen, careful about it, taking things that wouldn't be missed, spreading the absence across different shelves. A bread roll, some cold chicken wrapped in cloth, a bottle of water. She moved through the east corridor with the unhurried pace of someone who belonged there, because in this house the way you carried yourself was half the battle. The bolt on the double doors, the lock, the dark room, the wall. Hale was awake when she pulled the panel open. He'd been sitting up, waiting. His color was a little better than it had been the night before. The food she'd left then had made some difference. He took the water she handed him and drank carefully, the way someone does when they've learned not to drink too fast. "The signing," she said, settling into a crouch across from him. "You started to tell me last night." He nodded. He looked steadier now, still exhausted, still thin, but his eyes were focused. "There's a deal," he said. "An acquisition. A company I've been in negotiation with for 8 months. Vantage Group. International assets. Significant holdings. The signing was meant to happen next week." He paused. "It's been moved up 48 hours? Maybe less?" "Moved up by him," she said. "Yes. And once it's signed, under my name, with my signature, I'm in front of my legal team and their representatives, those assets transfer into a new holding structure." He looked at her directly. "A structure I would never have agreed to. One that routes through offshore accounts and consolidates control in ways that would take years to untangle legally. Even if the truth came out afterward, the legal challenge alone would be long enough for him to disappear with the money," she finished, "or to make the paperwork so complicated that no court touches it for years." He pressed the back of his hand to his mouth for a moment, steadying himself. This wasn't improvised. Someone planned this, carefully, over a long time. She looked at him. "Who knew you well enough to do this? The face, the voice, the way you move, that's not something you learn in a month." He was quiet for a beat. Something moved across his expression that was harder to read than fear. Older than fear. Like a wound that had been sitting for a long time. "Someone who had access to everything," he said. "Who knew my schedule, my patterns, my medical records, who'd had years to watch me." He stopped there. She waited. She didn't push. He shook his head. "I'll tell you the rest when I know you have a plan, when I know telling you is worth something." Fair enough. She respected that. "Then we have 48 hours, she said, maybe less." She found Leo the next morning in the East Service corridor, running his usual system checks. She waited until there was no one else within earshot, then told him what Hale had told her, the deal, the timeline, the offshore structure. Leo listened without moving much. That was his way of showing he was taking something seriously. 48 hours, he said, give or take. He was quiet for a moment, his hand still resting on the relay panel. "I've been pulling archived footage," he said. "Old recordings before the loops were installed. I wanted to see what happened before the systems were altered." He paused. "I found something." She waited. 3 weeks ago, he said. "A recording from the private wing. One of the cameras that wasn't on the altered schedule yet. You can see the corridor. You can see 2 men." He looked at her carefully. "The real Hale is unconscious. Being dragged." She kept her expression level. "Who's dragging him?" 2 men I don't recognize, but someone is holding the corridor door open for them." He stopped. "Collins," Amara said. He didn't confirm it. He didn't need to. His silence was enough. She thought about Collins, her clipped efficiency, the way she managed the staff with just enough warmth to feel safe and just enough distance to feel warned. The way she'd looked at Amara over the clipboard and delivered a non-answer as if it were an instruction. Mrs. Collins had been in this house longer than anyone. She knew every corner of it. She knew the staff schedules, the supply chains, the access codes, the rhythms. If someone was going to orchestrate a substitution, they needed someone exactly like her. "Can you pull the footage?" Amara said. "Preserve it somewhere he can't reach?" "Already done," Leo said. "I've got it backed up on an external drive, off-network." She looked at him. He was ahead of her on this. She hadn't given him enough credit. "There's more," he said. "The system alterations, the camera loops, the access log edits, they were made using an admin profile, but the timing on the access logs is inconsistent. Some of them were made at hours when Hale, the real Hale, would have been visible elsewhere, which means the admin credentials were shared, or handed over, to whoever is running this from the inside." "Collins had admin access to the secondary system," Leo said. "Not the primary. That's mine. But secondary covers a lot of the key corridors." Amara stood with that for a moment. She thought about how carefully Collins had managed the staff rotations she'd noticed over the past few weeks. Certain employees moved to different schedules. 2 staff members, a groundskeeper and one of the kitchen hands, had simply stopped coming in. No announcement, no goodbye, just gone. "He's been clearing the board," she said, "removing anyone who might notice something, or anyone Collins told him was a risk. Are we on that list?" Leo gave her a look that was almost dry. "We probably are now." The imposter's presence in the house had been intensifying in ways she could track without getting close to him. He'd started appearing in parts of the mansion he'd previously avoided, the main hall, the drawing room, the formal dining area, always composed, always with that particular ease. He held brief conversations with senior staff. He asked questions that sounded like management decisions, but had the texture of assessment, figuring out who knew what, who was watching, who might be a problem. He'd fired 2 more staff members in the past week. One of them, a young man named Davis, who had worked the security desk. He had been let go without explanation. Davis had been careful, thorough. The kind of person, Amara thought, who would eventually notice something he shouldn't. That was the pattern. Remove the careful ones, keep the ones who followed instructions and asked no questions. She watched this from the periphery and felt the walls of the situation narrowing. She had started leaving food at the wall every night, not enough to attract attention in the kitchen, but enough to keep Hale stable. She varied what she took and when. She was careful not to move on the same schedule twice. On the 3rd night, he was more alert than he'd been since she found him. He talked more. She sat on the floor of the stage bedroom in the dark and listened. He had a half-brother. He said it simply, the way you say something you've rehearsed but still find difficult. And he hadn't grown up with him. His father had kept that side of the family completely separate. He'd found out about the half-brother's existence 12 years ago when his father died and the will was read. His father had acknowledged the relationship privately but provided nothing publicly. The half-brother had been, in the language of the legal document, deliberately excluded. "His name is Daniel," Hale said. "My father had him with a woman who worked in one of his early companies. He supported them financially, privately, but never acknowledged Daniel publicly. When the will came out, Daniel received nothing, not even recognition. And you?" Amara said. "I inherited everything." He said it without pride, more like a fact he'd been carrying for years. "I tried to find him after. I wanted to offer something. But by the time I located him, he didn't want anything from me." He paused. "Or so I thought." She understood now the weight of what he'd almost said that first night when she'd asked who had known him well enough to do this. Someone who had studied him. Someone with reasons that went beyond money. She thought about the half-brother's face, which, she now understood, would be close enough to Hale's to pass. Same father. Enough shared genetics with the right preparation. "Does anyone on your legal team know about Daniel?" she said. "No one in my professional life knows he exists," Hale said. "I kept it out of everything. I thought I was protecting him." She sat with that. The irony of it, the thing he'd meant as protection becoming the tool of the plan. No one would look for a half-brother because no one knew there was one. "He's been planning this for a long time," she said. "Yes," Hale said quietly. "He has." She was almost caught on the fourth night. She'd been inside the bedroom longer than usual. Hale had needed to talk, and she'd let him, because she was beginning to understand that keeping him mentally stable mattered almost as much as keeping him physically alive. She'd been there nearly 20 minutes when she heard the sound she'd been dreading. Footsteps in the private wing corridor, moving at the unhurried pace of someone who belonged there and wasn't hiding it. She sealed the wall panel fast and pressed herself behind the heavy wardrobe near the far corner of the room. Not perfect cover, but in the dark, it would have to be enough. The door opened. He stood in the doorway for a moment, not switching on the lights, which told her he could see well enough in the dark, or that he already knew the layout of a room he'd been using as a prop. He walked to the center of the room and stopped. He stood there for a moment, looking at nothing in particular. She held completely still. She controlled her breathing through an old, deliberate technique. Slow exhale through the nose. Pause. Slow inhale. She had learned it a long time ago and had not imagined she would ever use it like this. He turned. His eyes moved across the room, not frantically, not with urgency, almost thoughtfully. Then he turned again and walked back to the door. He paused in the frame. "Security is being upgraded tomorrow," he said to the empty room. His voice was even, conversational, as if he was leaving a note for someone who'd return to find it. Then he left. She waited a full 3 minutes before she moved. She told Leo the next morning. He listened, and his expression tightened in a way she'd learned to read as concern he was keeping controlled. "He knows someone's been in there," Leo said. "Or he suspects it. He's not certain. Otherwise, he'd have done something last night instead of leaving a warning." That was a warning? That was him letting whoever it was know that the conditions are changing. He wants to see what we do next. She paused. "Which means we move faster." Leo ran a hand through his hair. "The footage I have, it's evidence. But it's not enough on its own. Defense attorneys dismantle security footage all the time. Chain of custody, system integrity, all of it. If his legal team is already aligned with him, it needs something else alongside it," she said. Something undeniable. She thought about what that meant. In a room full of witnesses, with cameras, with powerful people who had no reason to cover for the imposter. What could not be argued away? The answer came to her slowly, and when it arrived, it was not comfortable. The only truly undeniable thing was the real Edward Hale. Alive, in the same room as his double. Let the witnesses draw their own conclusions. Let the cameras record it. Let the legal system start from there. She didn't say it out loud yet. She turned it over, looking at the edges of it, checking where it broke. It was dangerous. It required moving Hale, who was barely strong enough to stand, out of the hidden space and into the most public moment possible. If it went wrong, she wouldn't just be fired. She'd be something else entirely. But if the signing happened first, none of the rest of it mattered. The legal structure would be in place. The damage would be done in ways that took years to undo, if they could be undone at all. She kept the thought to herself and moved through the rest of the day. Collins found her on the East Corridor, landing at the end of afternoon rounds. There was nothing dramatic about it. She simply appeared at the top of the stairs as Amara came up from the second floor, and they walked the same direction for a few steps in the unhurried way of two people in a large house who happened to be moving the same way. Then Collins said, without looking at her, You've been working late a great deal recently. The third-floor rooms have needed extra attention, Amara said. The guest linen rotation is— It's not the linen, Collins said. They kept walking. Collins's heels made their precise sound on the floor. Her hands were clasped in front of her, composed, unhurried. "You're a bright woman, Amara," she said. The compliment sat strangely in the sentence, the way objects sit on a surface just before they're used as something else. Bright people in this house tend to have two possible outcomes. They're valued, or they become a problem. Amara said nothing. She kept her pace even. "Mr. Hale has significant resources," Collins continued. "He rewards loyalty, real loyalty, the kind that understands the difference between what appears to be happening and what actually needs to happen." Amara looked at her. Collins was still looking ahead, composed, precise, every word placed. "Curiosity doesn't end well in this house," Collins said. It was almost gentle. No, the kind of gentle that had a floor made of stone. She peeled off at the next corridor junction without another word, disappearing toward the west wing with the quiet sureness of someone who had said exactly what she meant and needed no confirmation that it had landed. Amara stood at the junction and breathed. Now she knew for certain she was being watched. The question was whether it was a warning or a test to see if she'd run. She did not run. She found Leo in the monitoring room that evening and told him what Collins had said. "She was giving you a chance to be bought," he said. "Or measuring me to see if I could be," Amara said. "Either way, she's reporting back. Whatever I do next, they'll be watching for it." Leo turned back to his screens. He had 3 windows open, archived footage on one, live feeds on the second, and what looked like a network diagram on the third. He'd been busy. "I found more," he said. "I went further back in the archives than I had before. 2 months ago, before any of the system alterations, there's footage of Collins meeting with a man in the south entrance at 11 at night. Not one of the recognized staff. The quality is degraded, but you can see enough." He pulled up the still frame. She studied it. The man was tall, dressed in casual clothes, not the formal presentation of the imposter she'd seen in the house. This was earlier, before the takeover had fully started, before he'd moved in, before he'd replaced the man behind the wall. "That's a planning meeting," she said. "Yes," Leo said, and Collins let him in through the south entrance. "She has the code for that door." "And it isn't logged as a routine entry." He paused. "She's been part of this from the beginning, not recruited after the fact, before." Amara thought about the depth of that. Collins had been in this house for years. She had access to everything: schedules, staff files, security codes, supply chains, the household's daily mechanics. Without Collins, none of this would have been possible. The imposter wouldn't have known who to avoid, who to fire, who to trust. He would have been navigating blind. Collins was not a participant. She was infrastructure. "This goes in the package," Amara said. "Everything you have, organized and preserved off network." "Already doing it." She looked at the network diagram. "What is that?" "The holding structure for the Vantage signing," Leo said. "I pulled the documents from a draft folder in the secondary system. The financial structure it's deliberate. Whoever designed it knew what they were doing. The assets don't land anywhere simple. They route through 3 offshore entities before consolidating." "Can it be unwound after the fact?" "Theoretically. But the legal challenge would take years and multiple jurisdictions. By the time anything was decided, the money would have moved again." He looked at her. "You were right about the timeline. If this signs, it's not over, but it becomes very, very expensive to fix." She stood and looked at the screens and let herself feel the weight of the clock for a moment. Not long. Then she put it aside. "We need a plan that works in the time we have," she said. "Not a plan that relies on afterward," Hale's condition had been improving slowly. The nightly food was keeping him functional, if not strong. But on the 5th night, she found him shivering. The hidden space had no ventilation beyond what seeped through the old plaster, and the temperatures in the mansion at night were controlled for the inhabited rooms, not for hidden ones. She couldn't bring him a blanket without it being noticed missing. She brought him a large section of insulated packing material she'd found in the storage area, the kind used for shipping fragile items. Not comfortable, but it would hold body heat. He was grateful in the way that people are when they have been stripped of expectations and simple things become enormous. She told him what she and Leo had found. He listened to all of it without interrupting, the footage of Collins letting someone in, the financial structure of the signing, the tightening timeline. 48 hours, she said. The signing is set for 48 hours from now. We need to move before then. He was quiet for a moment. In the dim light, she could see him thinking, slowly, carefully, the way someone thinks when their mind has been through too much, and they have to find the clear parts of it deliberately. "What's your plan?" he said. She told him. He listened. When she finished, he looked at her for a long time. "You're talking about bringing me into the event hall," he said, "in front of everyone." "Yes." "I can barely stand." "I know. If it goes wrong." "I know," she said again. He pressed his lips together. He looked at his own hands, thin, unsteady. Not what they'd been 3 weeks ago. "There's no version of this that isn't a risk," he said. "No," she said. "There isn't." He nodded slowly, not with confidence, with the kind of resolution that comes from understanding you're out of other options. "Then we do it," he said. She reached toward the panel to seal it again. He caught her hand, not grabbing, just a light contact, the kind that says, "Wait." "If this fails," he said quietly, "if he becomes me permanently, everything I built, everything I worked for, it becomes his. Not just the money, the name, the record, all of it." His voice didn't crack, but it thinned. "Don't let that happen." She looked at him steadily. "I won't," she said. She meant it. She didn't say it to make him feel better. She said it because it was her answer, and she needed him to know it. She sealed the wall and left the room. The hallway outside the private wing was quiet. She walked toward the corridor bend with her head down, counting her steps the way she did when she needed something concrete to hold on to. She almost made it. The alarm was not loud, not the blaring, chaotic sound she'd imagined. It was a series of sharp tones, controlled, repeating. And then the lights shifted, the warm corridor lighting replaced with a flat red cast that turned the hallway into something that felt very different. Doors clicked in sequence, electronic locks engaging along the corridor. She heard them cascade, 1, 2, 3, moving toward her. She did not panic. She stood still for exactly 2 seconds, assessing. Then Leo's voice came through the earpiece, urgent, quiet. "East corridor is locked down." They triggered it manually from the control room. "You have 30 seconds before guards reach the bend." She moved, not away from the private wing. There was nothing in that direction now but locked doors. She moved toward the service access point at the side of the corridor, the narrow door that led to the maintenance passage behind the walls. She had noted it weeks ago. She had not imagined she would need it like this. She reached it in 8 steps. The handle turned. Service access ran on a different lock system. She'd banked on that. She pulled the door open and stepped through as the sound of boots rounded the corner behind her. The door closed. Darkness. She stood in the narrow maintenance passage and held absolutely still. On the other side of the thin wall, she could hear the guards, 2 of them, moving quickly, speaking low. She heard one of them try the service door. The handle moved. She pressed her hand flat against the door and breathed. The handle released. Footsteps continued past. She stood there in the dark for a long time before she moved again. The maintenance passage was about 2 feet wide and smelled of old dust and electrical cable. Amara stood in the dark with her back pressed against the cold inner wall and listened to the guards move past on the other side. Their footsteps were steady, unhurried, the walk of men who expected to find someone, not the run of men who had missed them. She counted to 60 after the sound faded before she let herself breathe normally. The passage ran the length of the east corridor and then forked, one branch heading toward the mechanical room at the back of the house, the other turning north toward the old servant quarters that hadn't been used as living space in years. She had noted both directions weeks ago during a morning when she'd had reason to check a supply closet near the entrance and had taken an extra minute to look further than she needed to. That habit of looking further than she needed to was the only reason she was standing here instead of in a guard's grip. She moved north, slowly, one hand trailing the wall. Leo's voice came through the earpiece again, quieter this time, more careful. 2 guards on the east corridor, one positioned at the private wing entrance, the control room. Someone's in there who isn't regular security staff. A pause. He's watching the feeds himself. She understood what that meant without asking. The imposter was not leaving this to the hired help tonight. He was managing it personally. "Can you see where they think I am?" she said, barely above a breath. "They're checking the east and south ground floor. They don't know about the maintenance access, or if they do, they haven't sent anyone in." Another pause. Yet. She kept moving. The northern branch of the passage ended at a grill that opened into the back of the old linen storage room. Unlocked, undisturbed, a space no one used for anything now except storing overflow furniture. She came through it slowly, listened, and stepped into the room. Dark, still, safe for the moment. She sat on the edge of a covered settee and let the adrenaline settle. She was good at waiting, how she had always been good at the particular discipline of sitting still when everything in you wants to move. Through the earpiece, Leo fed her information in careful fragments over the next 40 minutes. The guards made 2 full circuits of the ground floor and found nothing. The private wing entrance remained monitored. The man in the control room, she pictured him sitting in front of the screens, composed, watching, stayed where he was. Then Leo said, "He's leaving the control room, moving toward the private wing." She was on her feet before she knew she'd decided to stand. "Which direction is the guard at the wing entrance?" she said. "South side. East corridor is clear for about 90 seconds while the other 2 finish the south loop." It was not enough time. It was also all the time she had. She moved back through the linen room. "You back into the maintenance passage, south this time, and came out through the service door into the east corridor." The corridor was empty. She walked, not ran, never ran, because running looked like fleeing and the cameras were still on. She walked to the private wing entrance and worked the bolt and the lock in 22 seconds, which was 3 seconds faster than she'd ever done it. She stepped through and pulled the door behind her. He was there when she came through, not in the staged bedroom, in the corridor of the private wing itself, between the wing entrance and the bedroom door. He was standing with his hands in his pockets, relaxed, as if he had been waiting for some time and had found the waiting genuinely comfortable. He looked at her. She looked at him. Neither of them moved for a moment. "I was hoping you'd come back," he said. His voice was measured, not angry, not even particularly urgent. It had the quality of a man who had expected an outcome and was watching it arrive on schedule. She understood immediately that this was not a confrontation he had stumbled into. He had arranged it. She kept her face still. She had spent years keeping her face still when she needed to. "Mr. Hale," she said. The corner of his mouth moved slightly, not quite a smile, more the acknowledgement of a point scored in a game only he knew he was playing. "You don't need to call me that," he said. "We both know where we are." He walked past her into the bedroom, and she understood that she was meant to follow, not because she had no choice, but because he was giving her the option of acting as if she did. That was its own kind of control. She followed. He stood in the center of the room and turned to face her. He studied her the way she'd watched him study things on the security feeds, not with suspicion exactly, but with a thorough, clinical attention, like a problem being assessed before being solved. "You're not afraid," he said. It wasn't quite a question. She didn't answer. That was, she felt, its own kind of answer. "I've been watching you for a while," he said. "You're good. Better than the others. Better than anyone in this house, actually. You notice things. You don't react to them visibly. You wait." He tilted his head slightly. "Where did you learn that?" She said nothing. "The camera?" he continued as if she'd responded. "The food trays, the lock, the maintenance passage tonight. I hadn't factored in that you'd know about it. That was a genuine miscalculation on my part, and I don't make many." He looked at her with something that might have been curiosity, or might have been something cooler than that wearing curiosity as a coat. "So, I want to ask you something directly." She waited. "What do you think happens next?" he said. She considered how to answer, not because she didn't know what to say, but because she was deciding how much of what she knew to put on the table. Every word in this room was a card. "I think," she said carefully, "that depends on you." He smiled then, an actual smile this time, brief and real. He seemed to find the answer satisfying. "You're right," he said. "It does." He moved to the window and looked out at the grounds, dark, manicured, absolutely still. She stayed where she was. She was calculating the distance to the door, the time it would take to reach it, whether it mattered. "I've spent 11 years building toward this," he said. His back was to her now. His voice had changed slightly, not softer, but more direct, like a man putting down a performance he'd been holding for a while. "You want to know who I am? You've probably already worked out most of it." "Some of it," she said. "His half-brother," he said. "Erased before I was old enough to erase anything. My father had the means to give me a name, and chose not to. A private arrangement, a private support payment, a private erasure, very clean, very comfortable for everyone except me." He turned from the window. His face was even, not bitter in the way she'd expected, but settled. The way people look when they have moved through the bitter part a long time ago and arrived somewhere harder and more permanent. "I am not a villain in my own story, you understand. In my own story, I'm simply the one who decided to collect what was owed." She said nothing. She let him keep talking, because people who are explaining themselves are giving you things. "I don't expect your sympathy," he said. "I don't need it. What I need is to know whether you're a problem I have to manage or a person I can use." He looked at her steadily. "Those are not the same thing, and the difference matters considerably to your near future." She held his gaze. She thought about the man behind the wall, thin, shivering, waiting. She thought about Leo and the off-network drive. She thought about 48 hours and what happened if she miscalculated now. She let the silence stretch exactly as long as it needed to. "What are you offering?" she said. He told her plainly. A sum of money that was large enough to be serious. A new position, not staff, something administrative, with actual authority. Her name on documents that would survive whatever came after. He presented it the way a man presents a transaction he fully expects to close, because he has never been in a room where the terms weren't eventually accepted. "You'd be reassigned to the event tomorrow," he said. "Inside the hall, serving the signing ceremony." He watched her. "In that role, you'd be closer to the center of this than anyone on staff. I'd find that useful." She understood the secondary purpose of that immediately. It was a test. When placing her at the signing was not purely about utility. It was about putting her in the room where if she tried anything, she would be visible, surrounded, and managed instantly. He was giving her access and removing her options at the same time, and he wanted to see if she understood that. She thought that she probably needed to let him believe she didn't. "I'd need to think about it," she said. "Of course," he said, smoothly, without pressure. The confidence of a man who doesn't need to rush because he already knows the answer. "Sleep on it. Let me know in the morning." He walked to the door and paused, his hand on the frame. He did not look back at her. "One thing," he said, "whatever you've been bringing into this room, for whoever you've been bringing it to, that ends tonight." His voice didn't change texture. It stayed even. Conversational. "I'll know if it doesn't." He left. She stood in the staged bedroom and listened to his footsteps recede down the private wing corridor. And she stood there for a long time after they faded, because she needed to be absolutely certain he was gone before she let anything show on her face. She found Leo in the monitoring room at 2 a.m. He looked like a man who had aged several years in one evening. She told him everything. He listened without interrupting, which he was good at when things were serious enough. "He offered you a place," Leo said when she finished. "He offered me a test with money attached," she said. "The placement at the signing is the real point. He wants me visible. He wants me where he can watch me and where acting against him becomes nearly impossible." "Then we don't use the signing the way you planned," Leo said. "If you're at his side, you can't." "I use it exactly the way I planned," she said, "just not from the position he expects." Leo looked at her. He was quiet for a moment, running it through the way he did. She waited. "You're going to accept his offer," he said. "Yes. And then use the access he gives you against him." "That's the only way this works," she said. "He's confident. He's been underestimated all his life, and it made him very good at being underestimated, but he's not immune to his own certainty. He thinks he understands what I'm going to do because he thinks he understands what people do when offered money and safety." She looked at the screens. "He doesn't know what I'm going to do." Leo exhaled slowly. "And what are you going to do?" "Get Hale out of that wall and into that room," she said, in front of everyone. Leo didn't say anything for a moment. "He can barely stand," he said finally. "I know. The signing hall will have 12 people with significant resources and reasons to believe the man they came to meet is the man standing in front of them." "I know," she said again. "And if you're assigned to serve inside, you'll be the first person they look at when something goes wrong." "Yes," she said, "I will be." He looked at her for a long time. Then he reached over and pulled the external drive from its port and held it up. "Then I need to have this ready," he said. "Everything on it. I'd organized so someone can understand it in 60 seconds. Can you do that?" "By morning," he said. She nodded. She stood up to leave. "Amara." Leo's voice stopped her at the door. She turned. He looked like he wanted to say several things, and had decided on the simplest one. "Be careful." She left without answering, because careful was relative at this point, and they both knew it. She told him yes in the morning. She found him in the main hall, reviewing documents with a man she recognized as one of the legal team's associates, a young man who moved around the imposter with the eager precision of someone trying to be noticed. She waited at the edge of the hall until he saw her. He dismissed the associate with a word and crossed to her. "Yes," she said, simply, directly. No performance around it. He looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded once with the slight satisfaction of someone whose prediction has confirmed itself. "Good," he said. "Report to the event coordinator at 4. She'll assign your station." He walked away. She watched him go and thought about the note she had found in the pocket of her uniform that morning. slipped in sometime during the night in a handwriting that was neat and deliberate and cold. "If you betray me, I won't kill you. I'll let you watch what happens instead." She had read it twice and then folded it and put it back in her pocket. She would keep it. It was, she recognized, evidence of a kind. The event coordinator was a woman named Sandra from an external firm brought in to manage the logistics of the signing ceremony. And she was efficient and professionally indifferent to the staff she was directing, the kind of indifference that comes from doing this kind of job many times and learning not to distinguish between the people who carry the trays and the trays themselves. She assigned Amara to the east side of the Grand Hall near the rear service entrance. Amara studied the layout as she was walked through it, the position of the signing table, the arrangement of the guest seating, the distance between the hall's main entrance and the corridor that led back toward the private wing. She measured it in steps, 32 steps from the service entrance where she was stationed to the main corridor junction. From the junction, another 40 steps to the private wing door. She could do it in under 2 minutes if she moved without hesitation. She would have to. Leo met her in the storage room off the kitchen in the late afternoon, away from the cameras. He looked like he hadn't slept, which he hadn't, but his hands were steady and his eyes were focused. "Everything is on the drive," he said. Footage of Collins and the other man at the south entrance, the dragging footage from 3 weeks ago, the admin log alterations, the financial structure documents. He paused. "I also found something else last night. Communications. Text-based, routed through the household's internal system, but not flagged for review. Between Collins and the imposter, going back 4 months. Does it show coordination? It shows the schedule for when Hale was drugged. It shows Collins confirming staff patrol rotations to ensure the corridor was clear. It shows her confirming the hidden compartment was ready." He looked at her steadily. "It's everything." She thought about what that meant in the context of tomorrow. Alone, the footage was strong but arguable. But combined with the communications, with the financial documents, with the real Hale standing in that room, it would not be arguable. It would be a wall of fact that no legal team would have time to dismantle before the police were called. "The screens in the Grand Hall," she said, "the presentation screens they're using for the signing ceremony. Can you route the drive's content to them?" Leo thought about it. She could see him working through the technical architecture, the hall's AV system, the network connection, the access points. "I need 20 minutes of setup time," he said. "And I need to be in the AV room at the back of the hall during the event. Can you get yourself assigned there? Sandra needs someone to manage the presentation display for the ceremony. I can make myself available for that." He paused. "It won't look unusual." "Then do it," she said. She picked up her uniform jacket and checked the pocket. The note was still there. She left it. She went to Hale that night for what she understood might be the last time before the event. She moved with extra care. The house was different now, the energy of it shifted, the way air shifts before weather. There were more staff visible in the corridors, people she recognized as security wearing civilian clothes badly. The imposter was tightening things, which told her he was not as comfortable as he appeared. She took the maintenance passage most of the way and came through the service door into the private wing with less than 30 seconds between guard circuits. She worked the lock in the dark, moving on feel alone, and made it through. The room, the wall, the panel. Hale was worse than the night before, not dramatically worse, not collapsed, not unconscious, but she could see it in the way he held himself, the effort visible in his shoulders. The cold had stayed in the hidden space and the packing material helped, but not enough. She crouched across from him and kept her voice low and steady. "Tomorrow," she said. "The signing is tomorrow afternoon. We move during the ceremony." He looked at her. His eyes were clear. That had not changed, even as the rest of him had diminished. Whatever he had in the center of himself It held. "Hey, I can't walk well," he said. "You need to know that. I can stand. I can move slowly. But if I need to cover any real distance quickly—" "I know," she said. "I'll be with you the whole way." He was quiet for a moment. Outside, somewhere in the distant part of the house, she could hear the faint movement of the evening guard rotation. "I've been thinking about what happens after," he said. Not the strategy of it. She could tell he wasn't talking about the legal aftermath or the financial recovery. He was talking about something else. "The people in that room tomorrow, my board, my investors, the Vantage representatives, they'll have questions about how this happened, about how no one caught it." "Yes," she said. "I hired the wrong people," he said. "Or I trusted the wrong systems. Or I was too isolated and let that become a vulnerability." He said it without self-pity, as accounting, not confession. "When this is over, things change." She said nothing. She thought about what it meant to be the kind of person who could be isolated enough for this to happen. The particular loneliness of being Edward Hale, surrounded by staff and management and legal teams, and still being alone in every meaningful way. She thought about how that loneliness had created the conditions for a hidden compartment in your own bedroom. She didn't say any of that. "One step at a time," she said instead. He almost smiled. "One step at a time," he agreed. She prepared to seal the panel. She looked at him one more time, measuring him not cruelly but honestly, the way she measured everything. "When I open this wall tomorrow," she said, "I need you ready to move, no matter how you feel, whatever it takes." "I'll be ready," he said. She believed him. She was back in her room by midnight, sitting at the small desk with the lamp off, thinking in the dark the way she did best. She laid it out in her mind, the pieces of it, the sequence, the points where things could break. She would be stationed at the east side of the hall. Leo would be in the AV room. The signing was scheduled for 2 in the afternoon. There would be preliminary remarks, introductions, the ceremonial weight that events like this used to make power feel legitimate. She estimated she had a window of 15 to 20 minutes between the start of the proceedings and the signing itself. 15 minutes to leave her station, reach the private wing, get Hale out of the hidden compartment, and bring him to the grand hall. 15 minutes with a man who could barely walk through a house with active security while the imposter stood 40 feet away running a ceremony. She ran it through her mind again. The maintenance passage, she could use it for the first leg to the private wing entrance. That bought her something. The corridor from the wing to the hall was the exposed section. She would need to move Hale through it openly with no cover, which meant once they were in that corridor, they were committed. There was no version of this that was safe. She had known that since she'd decided to do it. She thought about the note in her pocket. "I'll let you watch what happens instead." She thought about Hale's face when he'd said he becomes me forever. She thought about Collins walking away down a corridor with her heels clicking on the marble floor like a clock that had been running longer than anyone realized. She was not afraid. She had discovered over the past week that fear required a feeling that something could still be avoided. She was past the point of avoidance. The only thing ahead of her was through. She sat in the dark until the small hours, and then she lay down and slept, because she needed to be rested, and she had always been disciplined about the things she needed. Tomorrow was going to be the most important day of her life so far. She intended to be ready for it. The grand hall looked like a different room by 2 in the afternoon. Sandra's team had been working since morning, round tables draped in white linen, crystal glassware catching the light from the overhead chandeliers, a long signing table positioned at the far end of the hall with the Hale Group seal embossed on the backdrop behind it, a podium, a microphone, 2 flags flanking the backdrop, one corporate, one the kind of thing you put up when you want an event to feel historic. Amara moved through it carrying a tray, refilling water glasses, watching the room fill. They came in quietly, the way powerful people do when they've agreed to be in the same place. Not with fanfare, but with the particular ease of people who have never had to ask whether they belong somewhere. Investors in dark suits, legal representatives with briefcases. The Vantage Group's delegation, 4 people who moved in a tight cluster and spoke in low voices. 2 politicians whose presence seemed to be more ceremonial than functional. A handful of aides and assistants orbiting their principals like small moons. Cameras, not press. This was not a public event, but the kind of documentation cameras that corporate legal teams bring to things that need to be on record. Amara counted the room. 31 people, not including staff. 31 witnesses. She kept her tray level and her expression professional and checked the clock on the wall above the service entrance. 2:04. The proceedings were running slightly behind schedule. Sandra was speaking to the event coordinator in a low, controlled voice near the podium. The imposter was not yet in the room. She looked across to the far side of the hall where a narrow door led to the AV room at the back. Closed. Leo was in there. But she had confirmed it with him at noon, a brief exchange in the service corridor, nothing longer than 40 seconds. "Everything's ready," he had said. "The moment you tell me, I route it to the screens." "Wait for my signal," she had said. "You'll know it." She moved through the room, refilling glasses, and thought about Hale behind the wall. At 2:17, the imposter entered the hall. He came through the main doors with the composed certainty of a man arriving at something he had built. He wore a dark suit that fit him perfectly. Of course it did, she thought. It was tailored for the man he was pretending to be. And he moved through the room with handshakes and brief words, and the particular warmth of someone who has been performing warmth for weeks and has gotten very good at it. She watched him from the east side of the hall without watching him. That particular skill, looking at something with your peripheral vision while your face suggests you're looking at something else entirely. He greeted the Vantage delegation. He spoke to the legal representatives. He accepted a glass of water from a tray and said something that made the man beside him laugh. He did not look at her. That was its own kind of message. He was giving her the performance, showing her how completely he had this room, how seamlessly it all ran. She understood the subtext. Look at what you've agreed to be part of. Look at what's already done. Sandra moved to the podium and tapped the microphone. The room settled. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us for today's signing of the Vantage Group acquisition agreement. We'll begin with brief opening remarks from Mr. Hale, followed by a review of the key terms by legal counsel, and then the formal signing. We expect to be concluded within the hour. Within the hour. Amara did the math. Opening remarks, 7-8 minutes. Legal review, another 10, maybe 12. Then the signing itself. She had 18 minutes at the outside before the pen touched the paper. Probably less. She set her tray on the service table at the east wall, checked that no one was watching her specifically, and walked to the service entrance door. She pushed through it and moved. The corridor outside the hall was empty. Leo had told her the secondary guard circuit ran every 12 minutes, and she had 30 seconds before the next one. She moved fast without running, heels quiet on the floor, and reached the maintenance passage entry in 18 seconds. Through the door, into the dark. She went by feel and memory, one hand on the wall, moving north. The passage felt longer in the dark when you were in a hurry. She counted her steps, because counting gave her something to hold on to, and she needed something to hold on to right now. The panel into the linen storage room. Through. Empty. Service door into the private wing. The bolt. The lock. She was running 20 seconds behind her own estimate, and she adjusted her breathing and kept moving. The bedroom door. She pushed inside. The room was still staged, still dark, still immaculate in the way of things designed to be looked at and not used. She crossed to the wall and pressed her palms flat against the plaster, found the seam. He worked the pry bar from the slim pocket inside her uniform jacket where she'd kept it since morning. The panel came free. "Hale," she said, quiet, firm. He was already trying to get up when she looked in. He had been awake. She could tell he hadn't slept, that he had been waiting since the moment she left the night before, holding himself in a state of readiness that had cost him significantly. He was pale. His hands shook. He got one foot under himself, and then the other, and he stood, swaying, in the narrow space. She reached in and took his arm. His weight came onto her, and she held it. "Okay," she said. "We move now. Can you walk?" "Yes," he said. The word came out thin, but certain. She believed him the same way she had the night before, not because the evidence fully supported it, but because she needed to, and because he had decided to make it true. She got him out of the compartment. He moved slowly, each step deliberate, like a man relearning something his body had almost forgotten. She kept her hand on his arm and matched his pace without rushing him, through the bedroom, into the private wing corridor. She pulled the wing door open and checked. Clear. And they stepped through into the main corridor. In the hall, she knew the imposter was speaking. She could picture the room, the attentive faces, the cameras recording, the legal team with their documents arranged precisely on the signing table. She could picture Leo in the AV room watching the clock, waiting. Hale moved beside her. 30 steps. 40. She could feel the effort in him, the slight catch in his breathing. The way his grip on her arm tightened when his balance shifted. He was making it through sheer refusal to not make it, and she kept pace with him and said nothing because there was nothing to say that would help more than silence. The corridor junction. 40 steps to the hall entrance from here. She could hear the faint sound of a voice through the closed hall doors, measured, projected, performing. She thought about the 31 people in that room, the cameras, the legal documents arranged on the table. She thought about the note in her pocket. 30 steps, 20, 10. She put her hand on the door handle. "Ready?" she said. He straightened beside her. She felt it, the deliberate assembling of himself into something more upright than he'd managed in the corridor. His jaw set. "Open it," he said. She opened it. The doors to the grand hall swung wide. What she remembered most afterward was the quality of the silence. Not instant. The room didn't go quiet the moment the doors opened because it took a second for the nearest people to notice, and then another second for the noticing to ripple outward. But when the silence came, it was total. Complete. The kind of silence a room full of people produces when every person in it has simultaneously run out of words. She stood in the doorway, holding up the real Edward Hale. He was gaunt and pale, and his suit was the ruined dress shirt and trousers he had been wearing for 11 days. He looked like a man who had been through something that had taken most of what he had. He did not look like someone who had staged a dramatic entrance. He looked like the truth. Across the room, behind the podium, the imposters stopped speaking. 2 identical men in the same room. One at the podium in a perfect suit, composed and polished and wrong. One at the door, held up by a maid, barely standing, unmistakably real. The room looked between them, and kept looking. Security. The imposter's voice was controlled. She had to give him that. He didn't shout. He didn't break. His voice came out level, carrying authority the way he had been practicing for weeks. Remove her. This woman is unstable. She's been causing problems on staff, and this is clearly a... He stopped, because the screens came on. All 3 presentation screens at the front of the hall lit simultaneously. Leo's doing, from the AV room at the back. The footage began without preamble, without explanation. It didn't need either. The first clip was from 3 weeks ago. A corridor. And 2 men dragging a third, unconscious, dressed in the same kind of shirt the real Hale was wearing right now. A door being held open by a woman whose profile, once you knew what you were looking at, was unmistakably Collins. The room watched. The second clip. Collins at the south entrance at 11 at night, admitting a man who was not on any staff roster. The third, the administrative log alterations timestamped, showing changes made during hours when the real Hale was verifiably elsewhere. The fourth, a text message exchange. The words legible on screen, Collins confirming patrol rotations. The imposter confirming the compartment was ready. 31 people watching screens. 31 people who had come to witness a signing and were now witnessing something else entirely. The imposter's face changed. Not into panic, she watched carefully because she wanted to know what he looked like when the controlled version of himself became insufficient, and what she saw was not panic. It was something colder. The look of a man who has run a very long calculation and arrived at the end of it and found the number he did not want. He stepped away from the podium. The room fractured into noise the way glass fractures, suddenly, completely, in all directions at once. The Vantage delegation pulled back from the signing table. 2 of the investors were on their phones. The legal representatives were speaking in rapid, low voices to each other. The aides and assistants, uncertain what their principals needed from them, hovered at the edges of the room doing nothing effectively. May Amara kept Hale on his feet and moved him to the nearest chair, one of the guest seats near the signing table. He sat heavily, with the controlled collapse of someone who has been operating past their limit and has finally been given permission to stop. "Thank you," he said quietly. She wasn't sure if he meant for the chair or for all of it. "Not yet," she said. "Stay here." She turned back to the room. The imposter, Daniel, was moving toward the side exit, not fast, but with purpose, the way he did everything, not running, calculating. He had covered perhaps 15 feet when 2 of the corporate security team stepped into his path. They were Hale's men, employed by the organization, and whatever confusion the last several minutes had created in the room, the footage on those screens had been clear enough. When they stopped him without touching him, simply stepped into his path and stood there, and he stopped because the math had changed. Collins was near the rear service entrance. She had been in the hall since the ceremony began, managing the staff. Amara saw her as she turned, saw her taking in the screens in the room and the man in the chair by the signing table, and watched her face move through several things very fast. Then Collins turned toward the service entrance. She walked into the path of Sandra, who had been standing near the door, and who, it turned out, had both the presence and the instinct to simply block it without being asked. Collins stopped. She stood very still. Her hands were clasped in front of her, the same posture as always, composed, professional, but the composure now had nothing under it. And the screens were still running. The text messages were still visible. The room was still watching. Collins looked at Amara. Amara looked back. Collins said nothing. Her silence had become its own kind of confession. Daniel turned to face the room. It was deliberate. She recognized the move, the choice to face rather than crumble. Even now, at the end of this, he was going to do it on his own terms. "You want the truth," he said. His voice carried across the hall, not quite the polished projection of the ceremony, but close, still controlled, still his. "Fine, here it is." The room went quiet enough to hear it. "My name is Daniel Hale." He said it simply, without theater. "My father was Richard Hale, the same Richard Hale who built this company, who built this house, who built everything in this room. I am his son, a fact he spent his entire life ensuring no one would ever know." He paused. "He supported my mother. He paid for my education. He did everything a man does when he wants to ease his conscience without acknowledging what produced it. And when he died, his will acknowledged me with a single line, excluded by intention." No one in the room spoke. "The man sitting in that chair received everything," Daniel continued. "The name, the company, the legacy, The public record of what our father built. I received a private settlement and a request through lawyers that I not pursue further claims. The composure in his voice was remarkable. She heard the anger under it, old and dense and very cold, the way anger gets when it has been compressed for a long time. I want you to understand, this was never only about money. He looked at Amara then, directly, as he had in the bedroom the night she'd found him waiting for her. Something in his expression was close to acknowledgement. Not remorse. Acknowledgement. I spent 11 years becoming him, he said, learning how he moved, how he spoke, how he thought. I had access to everything, his public record, his interviews, his professional history. I know my brother better than he knows himself, because I had reasons he never did to pay attention. He looked at the real Hale in the chair. You tried to find me, after the will. I know that. I chose not to be found, because by then I had already decided. I want you to know that. It was already decided. The real Hale looked at his half-brother from the chair. He said nothing. His face was a landscape of things Amara couldn't fully read. Not simple, not clean. The complicated terrain of a man confronting someone he had wronged by inheritance and who had answered it by doing something that could not be undone. This wasn't supposed to go this way, Daniel said, not to the room now, to his brother. You were supposed to survive, the compartment. I was not going to let you die. I want that understood. Whatever I am, I was not going to let that happen. Then, what were you going to do? Hale said. His voice was quiet and steady. Once the signing was done, once the assets were transferred, what happened to me then? Daniel was quiet for a moment. A recovery, he said. A public announcement that Edward Hale had been ill. A withdrawal from public life. I had documents prepared. A relocation? A new identity? You would have had resources. He paused. It was a different kind of erasure. I know that. I knew it when I planned it. You were going to give me what your father gave you, Hale said. The room absorbed that. Daniel absorbed it. His jaw tightened. Yes, he said, after a moment. I suppose I was. The police arrived at 22 minutes past 3. 2 unmarked cars and a uniformed unit, called by one of the investors, who had apparently not waited for the situation to resolve itself before dialing. They came through the main entrance with the particular efficiency of people arriving at a situation someone else has already contained. The lead detective, a tall, deliberate man named Detective Hargrove, took in the room and the screens and the 2 identical men and made the professional decision to get statements from everyone before anyone moved. Daniel was taken aside. He went without resistance, still composed, still himself, the control of him unbroken even now. She watched him go and thought about 11 years of planning and what it felt like to reach the end of it and find someone had been in the way. Someone no one had accounted for. A maid. Collins was escorted out by 2 officers. She did not look at Amara as she passed. She did not look at anyone. She looked straight ahead, and the composure was still there, thinner now, stretched. And Amara thought that the composure was probably all she had left, and she would hold it as long as she could. Leo came out of the AV room and stood at the back of the hall and looked at Amara across the length of it. She looked back. He raised the external drive briefly, just enough for her to see, the evidence still in hand, now in the process of being handed to Detective Hargrove's colleagues. She nodded. He nodded back. The medical team arrived shortly after the police. 2 paramedics and a doctor, called by the Vantage Group's own medical liaison, who had apparently kept her head through the chaos. They reached Hale where he sat by the signing table and immediately began the kind of assessment that told Amara they understood the severity of what they were looking at. He looked up at her as they worked on him. You said you wouldn't let it happen, he said. I said I wouldn't let him become you forever, she said. I kept that. He almost smiled. It was the same almost smile as the night before, present but too worn to fully form. "You're going to need to give a statement," he said. "I know. It'll be extensive." "I know." He looked at her for a moment. There was something he wanted to say. She could see the shape of it, and he was too tired to find the right form for it. She understood that. "Later," she said. "There'll be time." He was taken out on a stretcher 20 minutes later, insisting he could walk until the paramedics firmly and professionally overruled him. She watched him go through the main hall doors and turned back to face the room, which was now a controlled scene of statements being taken and evidence being catalogued, and powerful people processing something that had broken through the surface of the world they thought they understood. She gave her statement to Detective Hargrove in the small sitting room off the main hall. It took 90 minutes. She was thorough and precise, the way she was thorough about everything, and she did not embellish or editorialize. She told him what she had heard, what she had seen, what she had found, what she had done, and why, in chronological order, without gaps. He listened the same way she listened, without interrupting, taking it in completely. When she finished, he looked at her for a moment. "You've been building this case for 2 weeks, he said. "Yes." "While working in the house?" "While being directly threatened." "Yes." He wrote something in his notebook. She couldn't see what. "The note," she said. She reached into her pocket and set it on the table between them. The folded paper, the neat, deliberate handwriting. "If you betray me, I won't kill you. I'll let you watch what happens instead. He put it in my uniform pocket 2 nights ago." Hargrove picked it up carefully by the corner and looked at it. "That's going to be useful," he said. Days later, the mansion was different. Daniel's belongings had been removed. Colin's office was empty. The camera in the east corridor, the one that had watched who approached the private wing doors, was gone, replaced with one that pointed in a more ordinary direction. The loops in the security footage had been uninstalled and the original system restored. He fully documented for the legal proceedings. The staff who had been quietly let go over the past several weeks were contacted. Some came back. Some had found other work and stayed there, which was understandable. Leo had taken 2 days off after everything was done. The first time, he told her, he'd taken unscheduled time off in 4 years. When he came back, he looked like himself again, which was a relief. Hale was recovering at a private medical facility and progressing faster than the doctors had initially projected, which seemed consistent with the kind of person he was. Amara stayed on. She walked the halls in the quieter mornings when the staff was still at breakfast and the house was finding its shape again. She had been asked to stay, not just as a maid, but in a different capacity. Make one that was still being worked out in formal language between Hale's legal team and his management. She hadn't agreed to anything specific yet. She was thinking about it. She was not the same woman who had arrived here 6 months ago, and the house was not the same house. Both of those things were true, and she was still understanding what they meant together. She reached the east corridor, the private wing. She walked past the entrance, the bolt gone now, replaced with a standard system, the door open onto a corridor that looked like any other, and down toward the spot where the bedroom had been. The wall had been opened properly after everything. The hidden compartment had been documented and photographed, and the plaster had been cut back cleanly. It was just a gap now between 2 walls, a space where something had happened, he no longer containing it. She stood at the entrance to the bedroom and looked at the wall and thought about the first night she'd pressed her ear to the door and heard 2 words come through the wood. "Help me." And how she had stood in the hallway and made a decision that had no certain outcome and nothing to recommend it except that she was incapable of doing otherwise. She thought about Daniel, in custody now, in a process that would take years. She thought about what he had said in the hall. "You were going to give me what your father gave you." She thought about the weight of inherited inequity, how it moved through generations like groundwater, invisible until it found a crack, and then unmissable. She did not excuse what he had done. She did not excuse the compartment or the drugs or the cold deliberateness of the plan. But she understood the long root of it, the way she understood most things she took the time to look at fully, and understanding it did not simplify it. The truth rarely simplified things. Mostly, it made them more complicated and more real. She turned and walked back down the corridor. The sun was coming through the high windows at the end of the hall, the long morning light that turned the marble floor gold and made the house look, for a moment, like the kind of place where nothing bad could happen. She had learned better than to trust that impression. She had learned to look past it. But the light was still there, and it was still beautiful, and she let herself notice it without suspicion for the few seconds it took to pass through it. Some of the most dangerous things in the world were not hidden. They were protected. She had understood that before. She understood it differently now, what it meant to face something protected and not flinch, what it meant to be the person who stood in the doorway and let the room see the truth. She reached the main staircase and went down it, back into the house, back to the work she had to do. She was not afraid. She had not been afraid for some time. How many times do we walk past something that isn't right and tell ourselves it isn't our problem? If this story moved you, hit that like button and subscribe, because there are more stories like this one waiting for you.